Rise by T. Snyder. Chapter 11. The End is Coming.
Derek Riggs, Upstate Massachusetts, 1996. Matthew sat on a tarp, wedged against a crate of ammunition. His knees were propped up, and he kept his arms tightly wrapped around them. He kept quiet, wearing a sleeping bag to try and stay warm despite the 15-degree drop that had accompanied the night. Sebastian lay sleeping, snoring softly. The dim flame of the lamp illuminated the inside of the fort in the otherwise black forest, and I sat with my legs stretched out, deliberating what to say to the new member of our team. "Are you sure you don't want anything to eat?" I asked again. He shook his head without looking up or at me. I reached over to a Tupperware container and peeled the lid off, removing an energy bar. "What time do you usually go to bed?"
"When my mom says to,"
he replied, speaking so softly I could barely understand him. I gave a muted, exasperated sigh as I unwrapped the protein bar in my hand and took a bite. I chewed slowly, putting the lid back on the bin, but not before tossing Matthew a chocolate bar. He looked at it a moment, eventually reaching forward to pick it up. He ate without speaking. I didn't blame Matthew for being uncomfortable. After all, he and I had never had a conversation, let alone spent any significant period of time together. And now he was trapped with me in the woods. His brother was wounded, and it was a freezing night. It was also the first time he'd been away from his parents. All things considered, he was handling it really well. I didn't expect us to enjoy ourselves or have a pleasant conversation. In fact, if I didn't think talking would help cheer him up, I would have just curled up and gone to sleep. But I could see how miserable Matt was, and the idea of him telling on us terrified me. Matthew wasn't going to feel better without a damn good reason, and the only thing I could think of was treating him like an adult and telling him the truth about what his brother and I were up to. "What did Sebastian tell you about this fort?" He ignored the question, staring at the tarp draped over the entrance as it lightly flickered in the wind. "I'm not mad, Matt. In fact, I'm happy you're here. You can be a part of our team now."
"What team?"
he asked, turning to look at me. "You mean Sebastian didn't tell you why we built the fort?"
"He said you built the fort in case the world ends."
"Not in case the world ends. When the world ends," I stated, watching his curiosity turn to apprehension. He swallowed uncomfortably and took a moment before speaking.
"When's that?"
"I don't know. There's no way to know, but it's going to happen. And when it does, only the people who are prepared will survive. That's why your brother and I built the fort, and that's why we spend so much time in the forest practicing for when it happens."
"What do you mean?"
"Well, we exercise. We come up with scenarios like the one today. They're kind of like playing games, but you have to take them completely seriously," I explained, reaching over to a shelf and grabbing a couple of survival guides. I stood up and handed them to Matt before returning to my seat. "We collect supplies, map the area surrounding the fort, figure out where good lookout points and fallback positions are. We practice shooting and fighting We even spy on people sometimes to get better at sneaking around undetected, because after everything we have now is destroyed, well, we'll still have to survive. I finished, watching Matt look through the hunting guide before returning his eyes to meet mine.
But our moms and dads already know how to do all that stuff.
No, they don't, I snapped, my tone stern and defensive. Our parents only know how to survive in this world as long as it stays the way it is, just like everybody else.
You're wrong. They know.
Matt insisted, still of the opinion that his parents could do anything. He defiantly put the guides I'd handed him aside and returned his sullen posturing to the way that it was. I shook my head, discouraged that I had to convince him of something so obvious. Matt, your parents don't even know that the world is going to end. They think that it's going to stay the way that it is, and that nothing is going to go wrong.
Maybe they're right.
God damn it, Matt, I shouted, smacking my hand against the ground. Do you know how many people die from diseases every year? Do you know how many bombs there are in the world pointed at us right now? He shook his head. And that's not even the real threat. Those are just a few things that will go wrong when the end comes and people start to turn on each other. And don't tell me it's not going to happen. That's what everyone says who's too dumb to see the truth. And your parents are no different. They won't know how to take care of us when the world ends. They won't even know how to take care of themselves. So it's up to us to prepare for them. Matthew sat silently. He kept his eyes locked on the tarp covering the exit. He looked scared, and I realized that he might not be old enough to be treated like an adult yet. I took a few deep breaths to try and calm down so I could explain things better. Sebastian muttered something in his sleep and rolled over to face the wall of the cave. Look, I understand that you're scared. I was too when I first learned about this, but if we prepare for what's going to happen, then we can help our families and other people when they need it most, I stated, watching him struggle to understand. He unbuckled his arms from his knees and picked up one of the survival guides again, staring at it apprehensively for a moment before replying to me.
Derek, I'm just a kid,
he exclaimed. Yeah, I know, I replied, rethinking how much I'd tell him and how far I'd push the matter while he was still in such a fragile state. We sat silently for a moment before I decided to try again. It wasn't the nice thing to do. In fact, I felt like a pretty big asshole for pestering him about this, but if Matt was going to be a member of the team, he couldn't hide behind his age or make excuses for his weaknesses. The end was coming, and not even children would be spared. I know how the world's going to end, I confessed, confiding my greatest fear in him so that he wouldn't feel alone. I don't know exactly when, but I can tell you that the things you're going to see, the decisions you're going to have to make to survive, aren't for kids. So, when you tell me that you're just a kid, I think to myself that if that's the case, having you around might not be such a good idea. It's time to grow up, Matt. Matthew looked at Sebastian, his head tightly wrapped in bandages that were beginning to bleed through. Matt adjusted himself in his seat and pulled the sleeping bag more tightly around him. He seemed like he was going to cry, like his world had already ended, and being trapped here with me was his hell. But he didn't cry. He didn't complain or bargain with me about leaving and making the trek home through the dark. He took it like a man, even if he was just a kid. I respected that.
How will it happen?
He finally asked, after a few minutes of inner struggle and uncomfortable silence. A virus, I answered, taking a deep breath as I glimpsed into the future. It's going to spread all over the world, infecting people and making them turn on each other. But this virus isn't like other diseases. It travels through your bloodstream until it gets to your brain. And then, I explained, pausing as I tried to find the words to continue.
And then what?
It turns your brain to mush and you die, but it doesn't end there.
Huh?
The infected person dies, but the virus doesn't. It takes control of their body after they've stopped breathing and turns them into a ghoul, the living dead. It's called Solanum, and it's what's going to destroy civilization as we know it. I finished, intensely locking eyes with Matthew, with a hope he'd finally understand. He didn't speak. He didn't move, but I could see something change in him. Now, he knew. He'd learned what everyone else refused to see or hear. He was a part of the team.
Matthew? Sebastian? Derek?
A distant voice shouted, startling Matthew and I. He opened his mouth to respond, but I dove across the fort and pressed my hand firmly over his mouth, glaring at him so he wouldn't try it again. I then reached over and picked up the lamp, blowing out the flame and disappearing into the darkness. I held my hand firmly over Matthew's mouth and closed my eyes, focusing on the sound of footsteps and the cry of our names. Someone was coming.